Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, October 4th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the state of Nevada and a new poll from the Nevada Independent that shows Steve Sisolak, the incumbent Democratic governor, and Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent Democratic senator, holding very narrow leads over their likely GOP opponents. The reason why this is so significant is because the state of Nevada has been long a Democratic stronghold, even though it has been more competitive in recent years. In 2008 and 2012, they were pretty solid for the Democratic nominee, of course, President Barack Obama at the time, and then in 2016 and 2020, they both voted in the same exact way by the same exact margin for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden by 2.4%. So while Democrats may have had success over the past couple of decades, to be fair, over the 21st century, the Democratic Party is in this position where they likely could lose a Senate seat and a governorship here in 2022. So let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly we need to discuss when it comes down to the state of Nevada and what these numbers actually end up meaning. So we can go ahead and take a look at Real Clear Politics, which will show us the latest polls. I currently have the Nevada 2016 numbers up, but this is just the standard rundown. Essentially, they face off Catherine Cortez Masto against Adam Laxalt. Adam Laxalt, the former Attorney General of the state of Nevada, first elected in 2014, losing to the governorship in 2018 against Steve Sisolak, back for another race 4 years later. So he is expected to be the Republican nominee against Catherine Cortez Masto. She maintains a 5-point lead, which is actually the largest lead we have seen for the Democratic nominee here for quite some time now, or the presumed Democratic nominee, as she is the incumbent senator. When it comes down to the governor election, you have Steve Sisolak running against Dean Heller, who seems to be the best and most notable nominee. I'm not entirely sure who this other Republican is. I believe Dean Heller has maintained that front-runner status for quite some time now. Let's see if they mention their name. I'm not entirely sure if the article will or will not. I don't have the actual finalized numbers. Actually, it will show us the race against them. Republican Joseph Lombardo. So it seems as if actually this race is more competitive than the one against Dean Heller. I think partially because Dean Heller was vacated in 2018. He ultimately ran against Jackie Rosen as the incumbent and lost that race to the Democrats. So I think he may have fallen out of favor simply because he is a former nominee that lost, the same way that Adam Laxalt could be viewed that way. And people may be more inclined to be voting for a new name, such as Lombardo. If not, maybe there are a number of other things that come into play when it comes down to the Nevada state governorship. So when you're looking at the Nevada election results from 2018, I need to also show you the 2018 election polling numbers in the state of Nevada. For whatever reason, Real Clear Politics always averages out to a point where the Republicans have have more of a chance of victory than what their actual chance of victory is. When you look at the state of Nevada in 2016, 2018, 2020, every single time they have been polled in this state, they always underestimate Democratic support. And I will show you that in just a moment. But looking at the Nevada governorship, Adam Laxalt ran against Steve Sisolak, in which Steve Sisolak was supposed to lose by 0.6%, but actually won by 4.1%. This was a 5-point shift in favor of the Democratic Party, a very monumental one because the Democrats were not expected to win here. The same way as it reminds me of 2016 when President Trump and, at the time, businessman Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were facing off against each other, and you saw that Donald Trump had a 0.8% lead on Election Day. Well, the final results ended up being a Hillary Clinton victory of 2.4%. So the polling numbers said Trump would win. The polling numbers said Steve Sisolak was going to lose, that Adam Laxalt was going to win. And when it came down to the Nevada Senate race, it was a tie. We could not make a characterization as to who was actually ahead by the time these polls had finalized out. But Jackie Rosen ultimately ended up winning by 5 points in this race. So it is very interesting to see that for the final stretch of the 2018 campaign season, that Dean Heller, as the incumbent Republican, maintained a lead over the Democratic Party. In the governor's race, Adam Laxalt was supposed to win. In 2016, Donald Trump was supposed to win this race. So when you look at these numbers, you question, why are they underestimating Democratic support, and what does this actually mean? By the final results in 2020, the RCP average showed that Joe Biden was going to win the state by 2.4%. He ended up winning by 2.7%, I believe, according to Real Clear Politics. I think that FiveThirtyEight and New York Times put it at a 2.4% margin of victory because Nevada ended up shifting a little bit towards the right relative to 2016, but nothing monumental. So I don't think these final numbers are actually correct here on Real Clear Politics, but the point is that the numbers here, while they may have gotten it right in 2020, and I guess based off of their estimation, got it wrong narrowly. In 2018, it was missing the mark in terms of the governor election, in terms of the Senate election, off 5 points in both. When it came down to 2016, it was also off by a margin of over 3 points in favor of the Democratic Party. When you take a look at 2012, it was off by a margin of nearly 4 points in favor of the Democratic Party. And when it came down to the Senate election, it was off by a margin of around 3 points in favor of the Democratic Party. So when you take a look at these new numbers and they show you that Catherine Cortez Masto and Steve Sisolak have narrow leads, sure, I do think that their leads are not going to be absolutely astonishing, but I also think that there might be some type of underestimation of Democratic support in the state of Nevada. We've seen this so far. I mentioned it in 2018, I mentioned it in 2020, and I was right about both instances. I think this also can be applied to these new numbers that we are seeing in the state. And also I question some of the parts that are valid within the poll of this race. I think that the Senate race definitely makes more sense to be this competitive, but when it comes down to the governor race, I thought that actually Steve Sisolak would have a higher advantage over these Democratic challengers. And when you take a look at some of these numbers, I also question whether or not the group that was polled is an accurate representation of the state itself. About 60% of the state supports a mask indoor mandate, and I think that's something that might be representative of the state of Nevada. With the vaccine mandates, there's a 5-point difference here. Now, this is a blue state. This is a state that has elected Democrats routinely, and I think that the pushback here largely is due to the fact that there is not that strong of a vaccinated population in the state of Nevada. But based off these two numbers, you might expect that people would support candidates that support vaccine mandates and support mask mandates. But when it comes down to Steve Sisolak's handling of the pandemic, 59% of the public disapproves of the way he is handling it. This is very different than what the numbers said before. Back in June and July of 2021, we saw that OH Predictive Insights polled the state of Nevada, finding that 52% of voters here approved of him and 39% disapproved of him. Especially when it came down to COVID-19, the numbers actually expanded. 60% of respondents said that the handling of the pandemic were good, saying that this was something that was the right move for the governor to take in terms of his actions combating COVID-19. So when you see these numbers in July, and then all of a sudden a different number in, of course, September, October timeframe for Nevada, things can change, but this is a very rapid change. And considering the public's opinion on mask mandates and vaccine mandates really haven't changed either, I question whether or not this group accurately represents the general population in the state of Nevada. And can also be partly explaining why I might be expecting this reduction in support for the GOP relative to what these polls are saying. Because if they are showing the polls this close, but also with an advantage for the Democratic Party, and history tells us Nevada will underestimate Democratic support, then you can start to build ideas and start to form conclusions that the Democratic Party will actually be and might actually be at a better position than what the numbers are telling us today. When you take a look at the political betting markets coming down to the state of Nevada, we are more focused on the Senate election because there are much more national implications than the simple governor's race. But the governor's race definitely is throwing me for a loop. I'm very surprised that Democrats have a higher advantage in the Senate election than they do in the governor election. And I also am surprised a lot by these numbers pertaining to his handling of the COVID-19 situation itself. But when you look at the Senate election results in the state of Nevada, you will see that for a very consistent time period, that the Democratic Party has maintained such an advantage over the GOP to a point where the GOP never has come close to being the favorites to win this Senate election according to the betting markets. The betting markets offer a unique perspective because people here are actually spending their money, their hard-earned money, on this Senate race, and they are betting on whether or not a certain political party will win. So they put aside personal biases, they put aside their own wish casting, and end up investing in those they genuinely think will win. And as of right now, people genuinely think the Democratic Party will win in this race, and it absolutely makes sense. When you take a look, though, again, the issue with the numbers in this poll, they don't exactly match what we've seen in terms of the high approval rating, the pandemic approval rating for Steve Sisolak either. It says that at this highest point, it was 73% across the state of Nevada. That could technically make sense. For a brief period of time, you might have seen a very large amount of support for a certain candidate regardless, or a certain Democrat or Republican regardless of how they are being viewed. You know, these are always temporary. These are always considerations about the pandemic approval rating or the pre-pandemic approval rating. but it does not make sense for the voters and the citizens in Nevada to completely have flipped-flopped on this issue itself, especially when the requirements on vaccine mandates and mask mandates, when all of these questions have remained relatively the same in terms of the respondents. The people here aren't getting more conservative. It just seems as if it might be off in terms of the way they are gauging Steve Sisolak's handling of the pandemic. But of course, I'm not going to argue with this pollster. I'm not the one who did it myself, but I do think that there certainly is something to be discussed when it comes down to the validity of the poll, when it comes down to the accuracy of the people being polled in the first place. All of this is super important because it can also explain, yet again, why there might be an underestimation of Democratic support if they are polling a more conservative, more independent crowd than the state actually has. And also, Nevada is one of the few states with a plurality of its citizens not identifying with a political party, which is quite interesting if you ask me. But looking at this new Politico article, they say why Nevada matters in 2022, and they cite this exact poll. I don't think we should take this poll to heart. I don't think that this poll should be the only representation that we have from the state of Nevada, and unfortunately, we don't have much data from the state. Simply put, people don't start polling states until we actually find out the nominees, so that way they don't have to waste money on an additional question. That way they can get a more accurate reading with less questions to ask and a more seamless transition from question to question. Why go into 5 different Senate questions when you can only go into one by just waiting a few more months and saving more money that way? People are way more inclined to get better estimations about these races once the primary season is over. But we also do need to know which type of candidates are the best, which types of candidates are going to be performing at peak performance when it comes down to 2022. The state of Nevada, as cited by Politico, is super important because there are going to be some very large implications by the governor election and the Senate election. It says here that Nevada is and will be a competitive battleground state. It was in 2018, it was in 2020, and it will be in 2022. That was a Steve Sisolak pollster, saying it, quote, will be a very competitive race that we will not be taking for granted, end quote. Republicans are also looking to target this governor election. It seems here that a representative from the state of Nevada is torn about whether or not to run. It looks like Dean Heller is going to run. It shows that in the general election, Steve Sisolak and Lombardo are going to be head-to-head and the closest of the two, but Dean Heller still comes within 3 points. It says that voters are split on Biden's job performance, 49% disapproved, 48% approve. Another number that I'm not entirely sure is perfectly representative, but again, I wouldn't say that was wrong. I think I definitely could believe that, but I do want to just reassess the validity of this poll itself because you're just seeing a dramatic reduction in terms of the overall support, but the rest of these numbers can partially make sense. I think that the Senate election makes the most sense to me in terms of the final results, but this governor election is quite interesting. I mean, you don't find a governor who has a 60% approval rating amongst the pandemic to all of a sudden 38% in a matter of a few months. While Nevada certainly has increased in terms of its cases relative to July because of things such as the Delta variant, you also have to recognize that his approach to the situation likely hasn't been different from then versus now. And the approval rating has never been as low in terms of handling the pandemic until this point in time. And I can tell you that for the months of December, January, and February, COVID-19 was hitting America and hitting the state of Nevada much more harshly than it ever has, even harder than it is today. And to see such a dramatic reduction in support, I don't really know if I would stand by that as a super valid way to assess the state of Nevada altogether. Point is, final results here based off the numbers. Catherine Cortez Masto maintains a 5-point lead over her potential Republican opponent. Steve Sisolak maintains a 1-point lead over Lombardo and a 3-point lead over Heller in this race. So we will see how competitive, truly competitive, really, these races will be by the end of 2022. And they should certainly tell us a lot about 2024 by the time we see the final results. My only thing that I would mention is that Nevada, in almost every situation, has consistently underestimated Democratic support. Whether it was 2012, whether it was 2014, 2018, 2020, 2016, it does not matter. Nevada has almost always underestimated Democratic support, and knowing the state's electoral history, knowing the way that it is currently comprised in terms of its House delegation, in terms of its Senate delegation, we know how Nevada is going to go, and we can understand that these leads may actually be larger than initially thought, larger than what the polls are letting on, simply because of this reduction of support that comes inherent with every time a Nevada pollster releases their numbers. I think that the political betting markets have it right on the money here with a 63 to 39% chance. Obviously, that does not add up to 100%, so 61 to 39 probably is a little bit more realistic, but I think that this absolutely perfectly captures just the chances of victory for either political party in the state of Nevada. I have kept it in the tilt column for the Democrats when it comes down to the Senate election. I think that it'll be close, but I would not be surprised if it's decided by a lean margin for the Democratic Party. But like I said, I'm not going to take this poll to heart. I'm not going to use it as my only source of information from the state of Nevada, but you cannot deny that it provides a little bit more context and does show us a bit of an interesting result when it comes down to the governor election. Maybe not something that we would have otherwise expected, especially considering the very much national implications of this Senate election itself. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election and analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.